Hello, I'm Edward de Chazal from Jurassic Academic, and this talk is on perspective and analysis. Perspective and analysis. First, I have an acknowledgement. A lot of the material in this presentation is based on an article I wrote. It's in a teacher's magazine called Modern English Teacher, published in 2014, and the name of the article is Using Perspective to Analyse and Produce Texts. That's Modern English Teacher, Volume 23, Issue 3. So, what is perspective? Well, it relates to how we view our world. Examples of perspective include political, economic, technological. We'll give more examples through the talk. Perspective is essentially objective, but it quickly leads to something more subjective and evaluative. For example, in terms of its environmental impact, that's an environmental perspective. This proposal is worrying. That's the evaluation. That's subjective. Maybe it's worrying, maybe it's not worrying, who knows? It's up to the speaker or writer to say that. In terms of environmental impact, this proposal is worrying. So we have an environmental perspective and then evaluation. We can continue these ideas. For example, in ethical terms, perspective, this idea is unsound. Financially speaking, this is an expensive proposal. From a cultural perspective, this plan is worrying. So we have examples of different perspectives here. Many perspectives are closely aligned to academic disciplines. For example, economics, medical, medicine. Others are not. They are across disciplines, for example, ethical. And essentially, any perspective can be applied to any discipline. Let's give an example. A proposal for a new library. Well, we can analyse this from a financial perspective, environmental, aesthetic, technological, ergonomic, historical, and many other perspectives. On the next slide, if you can see it, there's examples of perspectives, and I'll just read these out. Historical, ethical, geographical, technological, scientific, medical, genetic, technical, sociological, biological, environmental, ethnographic, religious, social, linguistic, economic, financial, educational, political, behavioural, psychological, commercial, ideological, ecological, legal, chemical, logical, artistic, musical, cultural, intellectual, moral, military, physical, global. And there are others, many perspectives. In the next part of the talk, I'd like to look at the language of perspective. The language of perspective. First, perspectives can be expressed as adjectives, for example, geographical, technological, economic, or as nouns, geography, technology, economics, or as adverbs, geographically, technologically, economically. Typically, they are in prepositional phrases. That's phrases which begin with a preposition. For example, in technological terms, from a technological perspective, with reference to technological issues. Or we can just simply use an adverb, technologically. We can use an adverb clause. These can be non-finite, that's where the verb is not in a tense. For example, to put this in a technological context, or taking into account technological issues. Or it can be a finite adverbial clause, for example, if we consider technological issues, or as far as technology is concerned. Where do we put these phrases in the sentence? Well, have a listen to these sentences and see which sounds best. Economically speaking, this idea is risky. This idea, economically speaking, is risky. This idea is risky, economically speaking. Or simply, this idea is risky. Typically, the perspective is stated first. It contextualizes, it frames, and it introduces the rest of the sentence. The rest of the sentence in this example is evaluative. This idea is risky. It's not a fact, it's a person's evaluation. Maybe it's risky, maybe it's less risky. It's subjective. The objective part is first, economically speaking. We're talking about economic perspectives. A little bit more on language. The language can be explicit. For example, a cultural perspective can be expressed by the word culture, cultural or culturally. For example, the great cultural impact of printing was that it facilitated the growth of national languages. Or it can be implicit. For example, a financial perspective can be expressed by words like capitalism. Capitalism turned printing from an invention into an industry. These examples are taken from this text. Now this text is from a textbook on sociology, and the extract is called The Print Revolution. Although it's a relatively short text, it uses multiple perspectives. In fact, there's about 8 perspectives. Let's look at these now. So first, historical perspective. The earliest known book was printed in China in the year 868. That's a historical perspective. Also geographical. Metal type was in use in Korea at the beginning of the 15th century. A technological perspective. A printing press using movable metal type was invented. A financial perspective. Capitalism turned printing from an invention into an industry. A business perspective. The biggest 16th century printer, Plantain of Antwerp, had 24 printing presses and employed more than 100 workers. An economic perspective. Publishers were interested only in books that would sell fairly quickly in sufficient numbers to cover the costs of production and make a profit. That's economic. Cultural. The great cultural impact of printing was that it facilitated the growth of national languages. Now this leads to the 8th perspective, which is linguistic. Most early books were printed in Latin, the language of educated people, but the market for Latin was limited, and in its pursuit of larger markets, the books trade soon produced translations into the national languages, emerging at this time. So, to sum up, perspective and analysis. We can use perspective to analyse our topic, for example, the development of printing. We can analyse it from multiple perspectives. We can decide what to include and what to exclude. We can develop our topic using our chosen perspectives through our reading and research. In summary, it's a useful analytical tool to develop a topic, and practically any topic in any discipline can be analysed from multiple perspectives. It can be used, lastly, to frame evaluation. Perspective and analysis. That was the talk today. I'm Edward de Chazal from Jurassic Academic. Thank you very, very much indeed for listening. Thank you.